So when we're coming into any of our conversations, we look at it at the lens of talent optimization. And it starts by ensuring that we're understanding that the talent strategy is actually aligned with the business strategy and direction of the practice or the organization. And if that isn't present there, that's where we're starting. So before we're even looking to hire anybody, we need to understand what is the foundation that we're working from. Because again, people are looking for change these days.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Raving Patients Podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Dr. Len Tao. Hope everybody's doing great, whether they're listening in the evening, in the morning, or on the weekends. I hope everybody's having a great and awesome day. I want to remind everybody to think about our sponsors, both Dental Intelligence and the doc sites. I appreciate their support every single week, allowing me to come to your inbox at 5 a.m. Friday mornings. So hopefully you're listening to these episodes soon after its release. I also want to remind everybody about my event, Supercharge Your Dental Practice. It actually is September 26th and 27th. It's back in South Florida in 2025. We have some amazing speakers, 12 amazing speakers. We've got panels. We've got some amazing vendors there. So you can go to superchargeyourdentalpractice.com and use the code RAVING, R-A-V-I-N-G, to save $100 on your super early bird registration that ends the beginning of April. Today's episode is with Jonathan Bonanno. I'm excited to have him on the podcast finally. He is a seasoned practitioner in leadership and organizational development. He's specializing in psychological safety, communication strategies, and leadership growth. With over a decade of experience, he helps teams grow through innovation, talent acquisition, optimization methods, and behavioral assessments. Jonathan's seminars offer practical strategies to build high-performing, cohesive teams and create psychologically safe, productive cultures. So please welcome to the Raving Patients Podcast, Jonathan Bonanno. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Len. It's so great to be here. It's always nice to be a listener and now a guest.
That's great. I'm excited for you accepted my invitation. Just to start off with, actually, as I was talking about Supercharge, I know you attended the 24 event, which was in Scottsdale, Arizona. You came from San Diego. You came to Scottsdale for the event. And you actually served on a panel discussion as well. Yeah. Can you just share, I know we didn't discuss this, so this is off the cuff here, but can you share with the listeners and the viewers what your experience was at the event? I mean, I know there's so many events out there. My event, I think, is very different than what's available this day and age. I know you've had your own events as well, but can you just kind of give a little 30-second testimonial about your experiences at the event?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I found the event and the conversations to be highly educational. I actually left the conference with tangible materials to bring to a discussion, access to new materials and technology as well from the vendors that were there. That was great. So it's nice when it's more of an intimate setting to where you can actually still build a relationship and start having those, I would say, moments of camaraderie being created, as opposed to running down each of the aisles and seeing who you got to meet next. No, it was very intentional about who was there, why you were there, and then intentional about who you were meeting at the same time. I enjoyed it. I loved all the activities. I loved going up to that venue up north in northern Scottsdale. That was so cool. I don't remember what it was called, but it was really cool.
Yeah, it was. It was. Oh my God, the name just escaped me as well. It was an event center that they had they had an entertainment, they had all cool things you can look at. But it was a lot of fun. They had cars to look at. So no, I appreciate you sharing your experiences with the listening and viewing audience, because I try to make my event different. It's a different animal altogether for attendees. I put purpose on them. I want them to take action when they're there. I want them to meet the vendors who are there supporting it, because without the vendors, we can't have an event. So I'm very intentional in the way I do things, and I'm very intentional how the meeting runs. So again, thank you for that. As again, we didn't discuss talking about that, but I thought about it as we first started chatting here. So
of course.
So to talk about what we're going to be talking about on the podcast here, can you tell the listeners and viewers how you help practices, what you do, what your training is, what your background is? Why would someone want you to come into their practice and help them? Let's start with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I joined the field or industry of dental, roughly 7 years ago now, I came in from the lens of operating as a consultant. A lot of my background is in corporate consulting, operating in implementations, project management, business analysis, and that was heavily in the life sciences and pharmaceutical world. So when I decided to make that transition in my career, it was really looking at it from the angle of how can I continue to provide access to care and provide continuous improvement in the areas that I specialize in, which has always been like the people, project, and process areas. So as we really started leaning into that, when I started working in dentistry and started consulting with practices, I had to wear that lens of continuous improvement. I didn't come in with any dental understanding, but I led an entire dental team. So having to be thrown into the water and either sink or swim, if you will, that was the opportunity that I was given. And so when I took it on, that's the lens I consistently looked at, was how can I consistently improve the talent, the leadership, the culture, the conversations, the way of being that's taking place in the practice, and not doing so from I would say, preconceived notion, because I had a very unbiased filter going into the discussions. It was like, here's the gap, here's the opportunity. It's no emotional strain here. It's a matter of fact at this point. So I tackle things very black and white and colorful where it needs to be. And that's been a lot of what I've been doing in dentistry is looking at ways of how we actually optimize the talent that we do have. So many individuals are advocating about there being a talent shortage. So what can we do to advocate or combat some of that? Well, let's make sure the workplace is actually a solid place to attract new team members and keep the ones you have. And then let's keep growing them at the same rate. Nobody wants to be stagnant in anything that we're doing. We're creatures of change, so we have to be mindful of that as well and be responsible for that too, inside of any impact that it creates. So having fun in the workplace is my real, I would say, forte, is really bringing some of that back in, getting that connection built together, understanding who we are as individuals and humans is the first stepping stone to really being able to create the rock star team we always talk about.
It's funny, you use the term talent, okay, which is a really interesting term. Obviously, I work for Bird Eye. We're a corporate company. We have 1,200 employees. And they use the word talent a lot. Okay, I very rarely in a dental office hear the word talent. Okay, so I think that's really unique that you brought it to this setting as well, because like I said, being a practice owner for 15 plus years, I no longer practice anymore, obviously. But owning a practice, I never referred to them as talent. I mean, they were team members. But I think talent takes on a whole different level of how you look at who you're hiring for the practice.
Yeah. Exactly. What's the profile that we're hiring for, which is where a lot of the behavioral assessments that we've been able to pull in. We're partners with the Predictive Index, so we utilize a lot of their reportings, their analytics, their understandings. So that way we have more of the data-driven decision-making on the forefront, because when you're even in the interview process with a new potential team member, the conversation is very strict in my lens, right? Like, we are operating by a playbook. These are the types of questions that we're asking. It's not just loosey-goosey type of questions when we're going into an interview, because then now we're not comparing apples to apples. We're comparing apples to oranges to bananas to grapes, and now we are back in square one where we're potentially going to be replacing this team member again because we're not recognizing the true void that's present here. Hyper-focus on the talent. They have superpowers.
Got it.
Tap into them.
So do you work on, I guess you work on both sides. You work on helping them get higher talent, I guess was one thing you help with. But once you come into offices when they already have a team and you help like change the culture in the office as well, is that kind of where your forte is, those two aspects of it? Or is there something else that you do as well?
No, you're spot on right there. So when we're coming into any of our conversations, we look at it at the lens of talent optimization. And it starts by ensuring that we're understanding that the talent strategy is actually aligned with the business strategy and direction of the practice or the organization. And if that isn't present there, that's where we're starting. So before we're even looking to hire anybody, we need to understand what is the foundation that we're working from. Because again, people are looking for change these days. It's so easy to find a new opportunity on Indeed, LinkedIn. How are you creating your opportunity to be the best one? So we have to start there first.
That makes sense. So as we move through some of the topics we wanted to talk about, I think there's a lot of offices who do it right, and they have a great team, they have a great balance in their practice, but obviously there's other practices that don't operate well internally on that stuff. So how can you, or what tips you can give to owners or even associates who have some form of say in their own practice? How can they improve the workplace health and behavior that occurs within the office?
Yeah, definitely. So coming from the corporate background that I have, we had a lot of core values slapped up against the wall. And, those principles meant nothing other than a pretty pictogram that was on those walls. So really understanding what the true alignment and value system is of the organization, it really plays a huge, huge role inside of the succession planning and the growth opportunities that can begin to develop in the organization too. So when we start looking at workplace health and behavior, it's really understanding your people. We find ourselves getting so, I would say, bottlenecked into the functions of our role that we don't necessarily understand the why, sometimes behind why we do it together as a team. And that has always been a missing component from my upbringing, from my experience too, is that, we say one thing, but we do another. So how do we make sure that those two principles really coincide? And it's walking the walk, talking the talk, modeling the behavior that you want to be experiencing as well. I was 20 in my first leadership position, and at 20 years old, you don't know a lot about how to be a leader. You learn a lot about the traits that I would say qualify you as a leader, but even then, you don't really understand what that looks like and how that translates to the next person. So understanding those constructs very early on can then also help support what really is almost like the synergy amongst your team look like? How does it actually impact? Do you enjoy the work that you do? Do you enjoy the people that you come to work with? All of those play a role, but it also starts with us. So what is the attitude that we're bringing forward? If I'm toxic and I'm negative all the time and I'm always complaining about someone, I'm probably not going to be the best person that you want to work with. But if I'm coming in and advocating and constantly motivating and looking for opportunities and looking to support, the likelihood of me getting a promotion is a little stronger than somebody else, right? We start looking at what are people actually doing and causing to be created in the workplace, and then are we actually aligned with that change? And oftentimes we are or we're not. And then you work through those discussions too.
Interesting. So, there's a lot of, I hate the word toxic, but there's a lot of toxic workplaces out there, not just in all industries, but especially in dental. I mean, look, you see with all these proliferation of Facebook groups, which I think are really good ways to kind of vent, you see these stories that, you read and you're like, is this actually, happening and stuff? So from a perspective is, how do you go into a toxic environment that the dentist may not even know is occurring per se? So they don't even know necessarily they need the help, okay? Which I think you have to recognize you need help from somebody who's going to come in and do that. But how do you provide safety to a team in this aspect of things?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you touch on the toxic component, because that's part of it too, right? Let's flip it on its side. Let's not call it a toxic workplace. Let's refer to it as what you just mentioned. Is this a safe or unsafe environment? And it's inside of me showing up as my authentic self, me having a conversation with my peer, or simply asking a question, right? And that's where we get to bring in the elements of psychological safety. It's a conversation that gets to build the foundation for how you actually create culture within your team, within your practice, and within, yourself. How are you becoming the change agent and adding value to the change that's being created? So when we start looking at psychological safety, Dr. Timothy Clark released a book early 2020, which was like divine timing once the pandemic hit. And it's all around the 4 factors of psychological safety. And these 4 factors are probably the most simplest ways to look at how you bring psych safety into your environment. And it's looking at whether or not you can learn, you can contribute, you can challenge, or you can actually continue adding value and feel included into the organization. So when you start looking at those 4 specific areas, we then can identify where the actual common trap is. Is there a pit hole here? Meaning maybe we are not safe enough to learn, but we're safe enough to challenge. But there's not enough learning taking place because all it is conflict. Well, how do we then turn that into a positive experience? It's taking the time to understand, to listen, to dig deeper, peel the layers back of the conversation or the topic itself too, to really build that level of connection. Oftentimes, I've been seeing psychological safety showing up in new conversations, which is great. But it's not to be used as like a token term or a buzzword, because it's a bigger word, right? But it's not just something to just get slapped and thrown around. This is something, again, to be intentional about how you're setting the tone and the relationship with one another as a team.
Got it. I think a lot of it starts with leadership, though. Like I said, I mentioned a few minutes ago that, the leader of the office, whether it's the office manager who's a part of the team, the owner of the practice, could be even higher level than that, depending on what type of organization you're talking about. But I think a lot of this starts with leadership wanting to bring a better culture into the practice. So how do you recommend leadership takes a role in this process?
Yeah, it starts with them. They're the ones, again, setting the tone for the pace, the behavior, the actions, and the culture that's going to really come to fruition. They have to be intentional. They have to be willing to lean in and have the brave and uncomfortable conversations, as uncomfortable as they are. So when you are the leader stepping into this, it's making it a priority for the conversation today. One of my leaders, he's my director of operations. He's incredible. And we had our one-on-one last week, and he jumped on and he's like, "Hey, JB, I had to deliver some bad news to one of our team members. They had some performance issues, but I needed to remind them that this is a psychologically safe environment. So the feedback that I'm going to share is going to sound a little harsh, but I need you to hear it, and this is our solution to work around it." So it's all inside of how we are presenting it as well, and the way that we're standing for it versus against it. Because it's us versus the problem, not us against each other. So as the leader, it's your responsibility to also own that and take accountability and responsibility for that. You don't have to, I would say, own it to like your bone level, right, to where it eats you up. But you have to take that level of ownership to understand what is that level of change that you want to experience that you're not experiencing today.
It's interesting how the verbiage you use when you just were talking about how you discussed it or the leader discussed it with the employee. I think one of the biggest struggles for, let's even say myself, as owner, was having those difficult discussions with team members and how to present it or delivery. It's really the delivery that matters most. So is that something you assist the leadership with, in how to deliver things differently so they get better results from their team? Is that a lot of what this has to do with?
Absolutely. Teaching the simple communication strategies of just asking if you can provide feedback goes a very, very long way. We don't know what is going on up here mentally, but we all say that, we leave our stuff at the door or roll up to our desk and we're just in work mode, right? Well, we're people. We have other things that are going on. There was a fire upside my hill across the street yesterday that I had no idea about because I was on a meeting all day. And then you don't know what people are experiencing or even having going on in their world. So taking the time to slow down and just be present with it makes a difference, because then you know how to support them when those triggers or signs are starting to flare up again. And then it's not a frustrated Jonathan reaction. It's I'm aware, how can I change this and support this experience now?
It's really interesting because, like I said, I think it's difficult sometimes to know how to deliver something. But I love the word feedback. I'm all about feedback. If you listen to my seminars, you listen to me talk, I'm always wanting feedback from people. I always want feedback from patients from the review perspective. I don't call it a review. I call it feedback. I think people are more apt to give you feedback when you ask for it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like that feedback sandwich too is another angle that we'll bring in, is like, look, we want to make sure that you're doing the amazing things that you're doing and keep doing them. And here's an opportunity for you. This little tweak right here is going to make a huge difference for maybe your confidence inside of sharing it, because that's where you're tripping up. Who knows?
Got it. With the proliferation of social media and how big it is now, and how everybody's on social media, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook, not to the same extent Instagram, but people post a lot or talk a lot about imposter syndrome. I've seen that a lot recently in posts that people have had imposter syndrome. So can you touch base on that and what the best way to combat that is? Because I think that's a big thing that people are always wondering about, this imposter syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a topic that I have commonly come up against, the imposter syndrome, the identity crisis. I turned 30 this past November, so having the feeling of like, you're going into a new decade, you should be here, that, and the other, right? So all of those unspoken expectations start to flood your mind, and then it takes up too much space. So the way that I've been able to combat some of these conversations is identifying what's at the source of it. Is it the fact that I'm not trusting myself enough, or I'm lacking confidence in myself, or am I stuck comparing to whatever else is going on in the world and I'm lost in that conversation? It's like two spirals can happen, or they're simultaneously going. But the way that I recognize it is the more energy that I'm putting and focusing into those discussions, as opposed to just getting into action and staying in my own flow, those thoughts don't come to mind because I'm not busy stewing and thinking about what everybody else is doing or saying or should be doing, because I'm only going at the rate that Jonathan can go. And I recognize in the last few years that, I'm a hard worker. I push. And that burns you out. So knowing that has been the other area too, is like, what am I trying to keep up with? Who am I trying to keep up with? I'm moving at a pace that works for me, that's providing the results that I'm proud of, that is also awarding success for myself and my team. So why do I have to feel like I'm an imposter? Why do I have to feel like I'm less than, when the work that I am doing is contributing and providing value? So recognize that and take ownership of that, and leaning into that was like the gentle reminders and knocks that I had to give on my head, because it's very easy to get stuck in those discussions and very easy to find myself in a dark place where, I am the young kid, I'm early in my career, I've done a lot, but it's short in terms of timeline, right? So having to feel like, again, I was a young kid in conference rooms, struggling my way to get to the table. And that's not needed anymore. And the more that I found that I was pushing and forcing things to happen, the more and more of an imposter that I felt. The more I became in flow with things, the right things and the right people and the right opportunities were showing up.
It's funny. I was just having a conversation this weekend with someone we know personally, both you and I. I'm not going to mention their name here, but we were talking about, she wants to be a coach, and she's young. She's, she just turned 30, I think, and she was saying, I'm concerned because at 30 years old, what I don't know enough about something to coach it. So is it really interesting? It's really interesting to hear that because. You wonder at 30 years old, what are you able to teach that people want to hear from you? That's what have you learned in your 30 years? I'm 51. You're like a baby now. I can be your dad, obviously. I've been doing this for a long time. I have a lot of things I can teach. But when you're new in the space and looking to grow, it's hard to get some people to want to listen to you in that extent. So it's really interesting what you said there. So the last topic that I know we wanted to talk about, and I'm curious because I don't even know what this means. So I'm curious. So I don't even know what question to ask you on this. But you put something on this sheet that you filled out called Psychodynamic Psychotherapy. What is that? I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, so it is a very intense version of talk therapy. It is a lot of interviewing, it is a lot of research, it is a lot of breakdown of the psyche to many elements. It's really understanding what are the wires, the patterns that have really started connecting inside of our internal wiring and upbringing. It's a way and method that I've been utilizing inside of, my own self-talk, as well as even the conversations that I have with fellow leaders that are dealing with imposter syndrome or dealing less than, but not understanding what's at the source of it. Psychodynamic psychotherapy in itself really is talk therapy. So being able to create the safe space for conversations, for vulnerability to occur, and digging deep and staying in some of those really, really uncomfortable discussions. This is a certification that I received last year just because, I was on this roadmap of building out these retreats and plans and doing more coaching and more one-on-one and then these group coaching sessions. But I still felt like I was missing a layer that I needed to go deeper into, which was the mental component of us as humans. And that brought me into that deeper understanding of, what is triggering us as people? What is the upbringing issues that we have? What is going on with the term trauma being utilized as like a badge of honor these days? And it's not, right? Like those are areas for us to just use as a crutch and say, oh, I'm a Scorpio, so I'm crazy, right? Well, yeah, sure, astronomically you might be. And at the same time, there's other ways to get to the root cause of what's causing that craziness, what are causing those issues to be created and developed. So deeper discussions, more meaningful discussions. It's been really helpful. It's been really eye-opening for me as the facilitator of the discussions as well, just to see like, oh, wow, I'm not alone in sometimes these thoughts that I might have of myself too, right? And at the same time, here's a solution and opportunities that I've been able to work through that have supported me when I was in your same exact position. And it's really great. It's really meaningful to see the aha moments come to life.
So how does, someone's listening to this podcast and they wonder, how do I know if I need someone like yourself to come into the practice? How does someone recognize that they either have a problem in their workplace, because sometimes we're oblivious because, again, as dentists, we're focused on doing dentistry, where there's so many other things going on in the practice that we may not be aware of. So how does someone recognize that they need to bring someone in like yourself? In this case, I know you said we talk about two things. One is hiring better talent, and one is dealing with stuff in the workplace. So how does someone recognize those things?
Yeah, I would say there's two components really to ask yourself. Do you trust your team, and do you feel safe amongst your team? And if the answer is no to either of those, there's a big opportunity. That's a huge red flag to understand what's going on. So that's where we come in and help understand what the gaps are and realign them.
Makes sense to me. So is there anything else that we didn't touch base on that you wanted to bring up before we move to the lightning round Q&A that I enjoy doing so much on these podcasts?
No, I think we're good. I'm excited for the lightning round. Thanks for carrying the conversation forward.
All right. So let's, I'm going to ask you some questions here for those that, and we always have new listeners on every episode. For those that haven't heard my podcast before, I ask all the guests 8 to 10 lightning round questions. They're business related questions. So very appropriate questions for things we talk about here. So, but it's all random. Okay. So in this case, first question is, what about the future are you most excited about?
Ooh, all the AI stuff that's coming out. Hopefully they come out with some AI recruiters.
The AI stuff that I've seen lately is amazing. I can't believe what the stuff it can do. It's crazy.
It's so cool.
What book do you want to go back and reread as it's had a great impact on you the first time you read it?
A Child Called It was one of the first books that I read as an adolescent, and it's been a good amount of minutes since I read it, so I'm going to be looking back at that one again.
Okay.
It's a very strong story.
All right. What methods do you use to keep focused during the day?
Ooh, I have an hourglass on my desk, so I use this as my little task reminder now. So as I'm working through things, there it goes.
Oh, wow. Okay. Do you have a hard time telling people no?
No.
So you mentioned that I think you said you were involved in the dental industry 7 years right now, right? 7 years? But you got into leadership at 20. So yes. 10 years in that sense. So this question, I think, is how did you develop credibility so quickly?
Stretching myself, being the person to ask all the questions, as many as I could, in any discussion that I was in. And that's what allowed me to promote year after year inside of my corporate career.
Got it. If you could take a class to learn anything, what would it be?
Spanish. I am a Mexican that can't speak Spanish.
Okay. All right. What do you think is a unique skill that you have that help you become successful?
Patience. And I'm a good listener.
Hey, listening, I think, is the skill that everybody needs to work on. I am very forward on this one. I sucked at listening. I thought I was good, but I sucked. I actually had a coach that told me you suck at listening, and you won't be successful unless you start to listen better. And I always say I took a listening class. It's called active listening. I became an amazing listener. Now I show people I'm listening to them. So if you want to become a better listener, go check out Google active listening and take an active listening class. I'm such a better person because I active listen. So I agree with you 100% on that. So let's see. What is the one thing that doesn't add value to your life, but you still enjoy doing it?
Ooh. Doesn't add value to my life, but still enjoy doing it. I can't say that I don't do anything I don't enjoy.
Tough question. So
yeah.
Let's see. What 3 adjectives describe your strengths?
Ooh. Intense. Powerful. I'll use patient again.
Okay. All right. What is your definition, or how do you define success?
I would say freedom of time, being able to do things as I can when I can, and not living by my schedule, but not living by my meetings.
Okay. Who is the one person you love to have as a mentor?
Ooh, Simon Sinek or Adam Grant.
Okay. Last question, or two questions more. Who is someone that has been very important on the journey you've taken through your career?
In dentistry, there's been two. Sarah Cottingham has been an individual and mentor of mine for many years, and somebody that I rely very heavily on, and she's just a trusted figure. And Dr. Carol Ford is who taught me everything I know about dentistry. I sold her practice. She was the person that taught me and transferred everything over when she retired, and I'm forever grateful for her.
Two great names. I know Sarah well. She was also at my event. She came all the way to Florida for my event the first year.
Awesome.
So last question, which I ask everyone, so if you listen to it, which I love the question, what is one subscription you could not live without, either business or personal?
Ooh, subscription. Probably Spotify, to be honest. So I need some music, some podcasts, something.
Yeah, that's the first time. I mean, I'm surprised Spotify has not been mentioned more. I think either Apple Music or Spotify, but Amazon Prime is a very common answer.
Yeah.
You know, so it's very interesting the answers I get there. That's why I like that question so much. Plus, being a tech person. So, Jonathan, what's the best way for someone to reach out to you if they want more information on how you can help them, or they want to learn more about how you can help them?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to reach out to my professional social media pages. They're at The Chief Psycho. You can also check out some of our portfolio and work there as well. Talent by Zia, Psycho and Cito, and even our Chief Psycho podcast too. There's a lot of great insight and information around how you can learn a little bit more about me.
Perfect. Well, this was awesome. I want to thank you for finally agreeing to be on the podcast. There was a lot of great information. I think you may have sparked some interest in people listening because, again, there's things they don't know about their practices, and this definitely may have incited them to think a little bit more outside the box. Guys, if you like the episode, please share it. If you think Jonathan could help you, please reach out on his social media as he gave him to you. Whatever works. He's very easily found online, so I'm sure you can find him if you need to. Again, like the podcast, review us, share the podcast, make sure everybody knows about it. It's the Raving Patients Podcast, obviously. Thank the sponsors, both Dental Intelligence and the doc sites, for their continued support, and remind everybody about my event, Supercharge Your Dental Practice, coming back to South Florida, September 26th and 27th in 2025. It's at the Pier 66 Resort and Spa in Fort Lauderdale, so I look forward to seeing everybody there. And as I end every single one of my podcast episodes, remember, your reputation matters. Until the next episode, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll talk to everyone soon.